Welcome, welcome everyone. We are here with Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, who we had the pleasure to meet through our mutual connection of the SAND conference, right? SAND and non-duality that is mostly online these days. And you're on the board.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so that's kind of how we discovered your work. And so we're super excited to have you here today.
I am super happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, for those of you who are new to your work, I'm going to read just a little bit of background about you, and then we can dive into your life path and some of your teachings and your work. Dr. Bayo Akomolafe is the chief curator and founder of the Emergence Network. He's also an international speaker, an author, an essayist, and a Yoruba poet, which I'm very curious about. He was a professor in Nigeria before heading to the States in 2014 to be a special envoy of the International Alliance for Localization, a project of ancient futures. He's also the author of These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter, and Humanity's Search for Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. I just love the names of these books. He's lectured all over the place: Middlebury College, University of Vermont, Sonoma State University, Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Schumacher College in England, among other universities around the world. And he also sits on the board of many organizations, including SAND, which we just mentioned earlier. And then recently he became a global senior fellow of Berkeley's University Othering and Belonging Institute, and was appointed a senior fellow for the new institute in Hamburg, Germany. So yay, what a diverse and fascinating background. So welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So before we go into more of your current work, we'd love to rewind the clock a little bit about the point in your life that led you down the path of really understanding grief and trauma. And that was when you know, as a teenager, and you lost your diplomat father to a heart complication, you know, obviously a trying time for you, but this led you to a meeting of traditional healers, non-traditional healers, and really as a way to understand healing and mental health. Can you talk to us about that process and how that brought you to where you are today?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, my father's loss was, I think I describe it as a hole in my chest that I try to fill up with whatever beaten flesh of anything that reminds me of a father or something. And I use the metaphor in my book of screaming at the edges of the pearly gates, because I was brought up in the Christian faith. I no longer subscribe to its centrality. But yes, I saw the world as having stolen my father. And I was out there to right that wrong, so to speak. The thing is, this, of course, inspired me to go deeper into some kind of seclusion, which my faith provided. But the thing is, if you lean on the fence, if you explore the extremities of a way of believing the world or seeing the world for far too long, you will by and by arrive at its fences and lean on those fences, and you might just fall into the wilds. And so I started to have very deep questions, troubling questions around or about the things that I had received as a child, and ultimately what I was doing in that space. This, of course, led me to sitting at the feet of what your Yoruba people call babalawos. Babalawos are, I don't want to call them shamans, but they're like healers and priests at the same time. And I must add, lawyers, right? Because their work is about consulting a pantheon of gods and spirits right? And supercharged beings and ancestors arguing your case, basically. So there was something about my father's loss that set me on a trajectory through my faith, and then to its extremities, and then to the feet of Babalawos. And they exposed me to this beautiful Afrocentric notion of grief and trauma and the livelihoods and animacies of a world that was too intelligent for my discipline, psychology, which I'm still recovering from, to embrace, or to language, or to story. Let me stop there for now, but it's an introduction to how my course and my journey took me to the very places that I needed to be, where I still am right now. Yeah.
Did it feel dark at first?
Well, that's a beautiful question. Not at all. It was darkly lit. Let me put it. It had its own. It had its own bioluminescence. There was something beautiful and inviting and warm and hospitable about being in those places that I was trained to believe was satanic and otherworldly and forbidden. And yet it felt like coming home in a strange way.
I'm trying to think here. You said you were with the Babalao.
Yes.
The faith that you had as a boy and as a child did not take you where you needed to go. Mm-hmm. But in the end, did you come again full circle?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. You noticed that.
Back to source again. Back to God. Back to whatever it is, this being that you truly are.
I wouldn't frame it as a journey in authenticity. I don't think of the world in terms of stable identities moving around. I think of the world as deeply relational. Mm-hmm. So that in a sense, if we subscribe to an understanding of an entangling and entangled universe, there is no abandonment. There is no final separation. There's no divorcing of ourselves from a former thing or a previous thing. So that arriving at that place, which encouraged me to see the world in deeply processual ways, was also a revisiting of the places that I thought I'd left behind. Yeah. Right. It was a noticing from a different perspective and a different vantage point, the urgency and the beauty and the situatedness and embodiment of the faith that I grew up in. So that I'm able to embrace it and say, thank you for walking me this distance and for feeding me this way, right? And I still return to it. I still consult my biblical training, so to speak, to respond to issues in the world as diverse as climate chaos and trauma. Yes.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I mean, that really goes back to the non-duality, right? Of
course, there
we
you
all
go.
Are, right? And that there's no separateness, and we're all
it's not a narrative it's not a successor narrative. Like we often frame this in developmentally, how do I say it? In developmentally linear ways, like I moved from A to B, and it's famous in US-based psychology, right, to think of the world that way. But time is slushy for us. The Yoruba people don't even have a concept of cyclical time. It's slushy time. Temporalities are slushy and messy and chimeric and monstrous, so that to be here is already to participate in there. Right? The past is yet to come. The future has already happened. Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful, actually. I've lived in Africa 3 times now, but never really went to, Kenya. I taught English at an all-girls school in Lamu, Kenya, when I was very young. And then I was a foreign exchange student to South Africa, pre-apartheid. So you can imagine what I went through there. Oh, yeah. Opened my eyes to a reality I didn't think existed. But we all know there's no accidents why we take these paths in life, because as a foreign exchange student, You may or may not know that. You don't choose where you go. But anyway, and I've also driven from Cape Town to Malawi. And so, lived on the beaches of Malawi for a while, but really have no experience with Western Africa, which is where you're from.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm really kind of curious to learn about the poetry that came out of there for you, and, even the music and the culture that influenced you.
Yes. Well, I am the symptom, if you will. That's too medical a language. I am a grateful recipient of a groundswell, a beautiful, prestigious legacy of speaking and offering libations of words to things that will not be languaged or will not be voiced. The Yoruba people are a meandering diasporic people. That's the reason why I speak about, of course, to start things out, the gift of mispronunciation, because we say it's only not that we say this, it's kind of implied in the cultures that I come from, that it's when a stranger mispronounces our name that we notice God as if for the first time, right? Because if we get it right all the time, as is the case in some Western traditions or industrial settings where there is an insistence on compliance to the teeth, right? If we get it right all the time, if there's no break in transmission, then there is no way to see new things. No novelty could appear. We would be trapped in and ensconced by the familiar. So we notice the new as if for the first time. So such traditions, spoken through the lips of Wole Soyinka or narrated with the wonderful spellbinding poetry of Chinua Achebe or Chimamanda Adichie. These are the traditions that have encouraged my path.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I just want you to say that one more time.
Oh, I'm not.
This part, that when you notice the mispronunciations or the misarticulations,
yes,
that you notice, you said God in the other person.
Yes.
Explain that.
Mispronunciation is not just a linguistic phenomenon. Mispronunciation is when things go wrong, and we see them as monstrous cracks, openings. We have stories about mispronunciations writ large. I will tell you one briefly. It's one of the large, the increasingly generous archive of stories that includes our trickster issue, who is like Loki to people who understand Loki to be a trickster, or Anansi the spider, or Tortoise Ijapa from our traditions as well. Issue is the mediator between the sacred and the ordinary. He's the man of the crossroads, the one who holds Ashe, the one who tuned Robert Johnson's guitar in the United States and made him sing beautifully, the one whose phallic representation is the Washington Monument. He's everywhere, is what I'm trying to say. Good, I'm not even joking with that last bit, but that's a good story. Issue is said to have done something that might appear villainous. When the slave ships came to Africa, Bight of Benin, the place we now call Nigeria, there was an insurgency of some kind, an archetypal insurgency. The story is told that Ogun, the god of war and of victory and metal. So you know that this dude was guaranteed to win, right? So he was like the god of victory. He mounted up this insurgency and rushed to the beach and said, let's take them out. Let's push them away. But on the way there, he was intercepted by Ishu, his brother, who kind of encouraged him to slow down and slipped into his drink this toxic thing that put him to sleep. And then Ishu proceeded to travel with the slaves by stealing into, as a stowaway, into the ships and conducting this journey into the creolized future. Now, it might appear to be a story in villainy, right? This is the bad dude. Why did you not stop this from happening? But it's about how newness appears, how ethical flows produce novelty, right? Which doesn't happen without a crack, or rupture in the fabric of reality. Issue exploited that crack to create creolized worlds, to create and to experiment with capoeira, santeria, candomblé, all the beautiful Rastafarian spiritualities that are afoot, trying to suggest that sometimes you have to go through the open maw of the monster to experience new things, right? So it was like there was a mispronunciation of reality itself and an encouragement to go through it, right? Ogun was about the correct pronunciation of things. Close up the gap, close up the wound. But Eshu the trickster knows that wounds are portals to new realities. And I think this kind of spills into our traditions of thinking about the world. And even in meeting a stranger, the stranger comes across as the impossible, God, right? That there's something divine about meeting a stranger, which informs our cultures of hospitality, right? So if a stranger says, Bayo Akomolafe, right, it's not an occasion to close the gap again and insist, and I'm not speaking for everyone, of course. There are multiplicities of Yoruba people in Europe, in the Yoruba tradition. But the ones that I'm really in touch with, those traditions I'm in touch with, would suggest that it's not an opportunity to close the gap, it's to listen, it's to bend one's ears to the tonality of the diasporic, to allow oneself to travel. The Yoruba people are traveling people. In fact, our name, Yoruba, is given to us by another tribe. So we're not even our own selves. We're beside ourselves. And ecstasy always needs mispronunciation.
Well, that makes me feel really good, because anything that I've mispronounced in your bio or any of these questions today, I'm good. I just opened a portal to new realities.
That is how my ears are tuned to it. Yes.
Yeah, it almost brings me to tears. Your words, your poetic meter, your fluctuations in your patterns of your voice, the ability to tell stories. It is truly, I don't know how to say this. There is a tribal nature here that is at work, a continuation of Gaia here that's occurring. And I get goosebumps and I get everything coming to me. And it is absolutely incredible the way you are able to tell these stories in ways that touch an individual's heart that has absolutely nothing to know about you, but you touch these individual hearts in ways that it opens us up so much that it's almost a jubilation, a celebration. And that's what I'm getting at this very moment. It is just incredible.
It's visceral. It's like it's at a visceral level is what it feels like.
What's coming to me right now at this very moment. It is just incredible.
Because it's not always about understanding those nuances and the textures that we can't all know if we don't come from that particular culture. But it's feeling it in our bones, right? It's feeling it in the fabric of who we are, those portals that you speak about. Those portals that you speak about, we all have them in different traditions. And it is going into, it's interesting. You talked about, when I asked you, was there a dark patch or did it feel that way initially? And, we think of that in traditional religion, whether it's Christianity or any really traditional religion. This evil, the darkness, right? The void, right? In Japan, the void is celebrated. It's their fifth element, right? So in pagan societies, we have the earth, the water, and the air and fire, and then we have the ether. But in Japan and other Asian traditions, it's the void, that darkness, where we open to a portal of nothingness and everythingness.
I mean, it's I am acutely aware, and I constantly describe myself as a recovering psychologist because I was the subject of a heliopsychology. I will pronounce it that way. One that is given absolutely to a notion of the light as, the sun, or the light, the sun king, as Stanton Marlin would describe it, as the overall dominating, governing principle of the psyche, right? Banishing and pathologizing, the dark psychic, tentacular, rhizomatic features of mind, right? Pushing away that. And what this translates to is the insistence that we ought to be well, right? And we ought to feel good about ourselves, which is an incredibly modern and industrial thing, right? Being in those places with those people, and in the places that I am right now, I'm able to understand that even the darkness, even grief is a form of being with the world, right? It's a becoming with the world. There is no becoming that is not a becoming with, right? And this is really an invitation to stay with the loaminess of the soil and not to push it away and build a parking lot over it in my insistence on being well.
Oh, that's great. I love that analogy, the parking lot analogy. That's brilliant, right? I mean, Pema Chodron and other Buddhists and other traditions talk about that. You can't dart around trauma and grief. You have to go through it. All the layers and the textures and feeling those layers and textures, all of it, right? There's no escaping. It's feeling it. It's being it. I am kind of curious, when you spent time with those healers, what part of that equation did you learn from them going through the muck, right? In order to deal with trauma, and then, of course, to teach it in the West.
It's that, I'll put it this way, maybe I'll enter into the room of that consideration in this way, that we don't live in cities per se. That's a Newtonian, Cartesian way of seeing things. Like, we're already completed bodies, fates accompli. We are self-enclosed individuals, and then we live in containing cities. It's very mechanistic. Instead, I would rather prefer to say that we are constantly manufactured and embodied and constantly put together and torn apart again and again within cities, right? And this is what entanglement means. We often do not notice, this is what psychologists are learning to describe as an embodied mind or external cognition, right? But furniture affects us, texture, colors, things that we think of as external are actually very internal, so to speak, or rather the internal is already exposed, right? So subjectivity is shaped by our interactions because we're not relational beings per se. We are relations concretized, right? To say we're relational would say that, oh, I'm already there, but I relate with the world. No, we are relations, congealed momentarily, but are still ongoing. So we are not individuals per se, we're individuations, processes still coming. And I'm saying all of this, to notice how, the most impactful lessons of those moments was noticing how I was subjectivized as a member of modern civilization. Because to them, for instance, there is no privacy of mind. Of course, this is at the heart of our understanding that grief is a public event, right? There's no private grief. To grieve is to participate in the dehiscence of a seed buried in the soil, right? I am participating in ways that escapes language, escapes conceptualization. So I asked one particular healer, priest, lawyer, once, Babalawo, I said to him, So how do you conceive and conceptualize auditory hallucination, which in my own training within the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, is described in a particular way, right? After a certain time, it becomes pathological and stuff like that. So how do you understand it? Do you have a nosology, a classificatory system? What's your idea about it? How do you medicate it? What pills do you give? And I remember the eye-opening response. It was, and I mean that literally, I'm not speaking in metaphors. His eyes widened and it was like, why would you want to give pills for hearing voices in your head? Is anyone listening to this guy? Is anyone listening? Why would you want to give pills to that? What if that's your grandmother reaching out to you? What if that's your grandfather or an ancestor speaking to you? In other words, he didn't experience the world as I'm an individual and the world is out there. It was like again, language fails me. I speak within the language of ownership relations, but his mind was already a nexus point, a site of many crossroads, many chiasmatic journeys. It was ancestral, it was bacterial, it was fungal, it was viral, it was all of these things, right? It wasn't those voices out there. It wasn't pathological. This is what psychologists have learned to call dissociative states, right? So we must get you back in order. We must keep you productive. It was nothing like that. It was an invitation to see maybe those moments as a spiritual crisis, as a portal, as a wormhole to other kinds of becomings. So I'm thinking about the ways I'm constantly, and we are constantly cut away from our tentacular, intimate others, right? How we're cut away from others and how we're fit within the parameters and algorithms of suburbia. How we're told that this is how to be well. This is a clean bill of health. This is what it means to be human, right? There's something imperial and colonial in the ways that we think about being well that is cut away from the beautiful entangling of bodies that I learned to describe eventually.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, a few things came to mind as you were speaking. I was thinking unified mind, cosmic mind, right? That came to mind. And then the other piece that came to mind was how many shamans think about these elements like fire, right? All of the elements, right? They also think about things like soil, tree bark, herbs, right? These are our ancestors. They are actually living, breathing beings that we are connected to, and they have messages for us. So, it's interesting because you're coming at it from a totally different perspective, including psychology. And as part of this series, we have Dr. Jude Currivan, who's a cosmologist and also physicist, right? And she has conversations with mold and moss and dirt and trees and sticks and stones, right? And she's a cosmologist. So I think we really do need to rethink and redefine what it does mean to be human, right?
Yes.
Because, we've been boxed. We've been put in a box that has created this separateness from all that is, right? The unified mind, the cosmic mind. I mean, you just so beautifully, with your poetic way, just described entanglement from quantum physics. It was amazing.
It's interesting what you talk about some of these individuals, the DSM 4 or 5. By profession, I am a speech and language pathologist. I work with children with special needs, especially those on the autistic spectrum. And many times they're very young, but I try to, from a spiritual sense, I know that they're everywhere. They're just communicating everywhere. But I try to pull them just into this reality just for a bit and to communicate with them. Bring them in and then let them go back out and then bring them back in. Because I know that they're having an experience much different than many of us are having. But for me as a professional, I try to pull them in again so that they can communicate with us here within this particular dimension, whatever you want to call it, so that we can and they can experience this. And I often wonder, as you had mentioned, that when I see individuals speaking to themselves, they may be on the street, I say to myself, who are they speaking to? Where are they at this very moment? And I know it's difficult as psychologists and as healthcare professionals that we want to help them. But you're right, medication is not always the trick. That is not always the truth for these individuals. Right. And I appreciate you talking about this. And it touches my heart too, because I work with individuals that have emotional difficulties and have these mental issues, and
they're labeled and they're thrown in a box, right?
And they're often put on medication, and I'm like, it's not always the best thing to do.
Well, let me respond to that briefly in this way. You probably know the story of Fernand Deligny. He was a French visionary, and he worked with children with special needs as well. He lived in the aftermath of, he did his work in the aftermath of the Second World War in France. He started to work in a time when there was some resistance against the fascist arrangement of the Nazi government, which translated into the Vichy regime in France, right? And with people who started to think about the asylum as a form of fascism, right? As a form of capture, right? So he wanted to create this beeline, this snaking, pheromonic trail away from capture. And so he, maybe in the same way that a Pied Piper did, he led nonverbal autistic children, especially one that really inspired him called Jean-Marie, to a rocky terrain, building this guerrilla-style visionary communities, and camps, where the objective wasn't to rehabilitate these autistic children, where it wasn't to teach them language. It was to admit that maybe sanity gets in the way of transformation.
Oh, I like that.
Right? Maybe our infatuation with wording and languaging everything does not allow us to notice what's happening in the world. And maybe it's not about inclusive politics. Maybe it's about an autistic politics that allows us to accompany them, these so-called cracks, these mispronunciations of well-being. How do we steal into the cracks, if you will, like stowaways on a ship? And so they started to do this thing called tracing. They would follow the kids as they wandered about. They call these wanderings, wandering lines, Linder. And they would follow the kids as they wandered around the terrain, not trying to drag them back to camp, not trying to insist on where to go, but to just wander with them. They call them non-instrumental wander lines, the full name, right? But there was some instrumentality, there was something quite remarkable about what the children were doing, which speaks to what you were saying, brother, about being in touch with something else. Because they later discovered that it seemed their wanderings tracked the movement of water underground, which their neurotypical embodiment, so to speak, was not able to attune itself to. And I say this because my son is autistic. He's 5 years old, and I struggled with and I don't want to say his autism, because I think autism is like a body without organs, or organs without a body. It's an intensity of a field and less a property of a particular body, because if bodies are rhizomatic, then no one owns it. It's an intensity that enlists bodies, so to speak, like a territoriality of field. It's more atmospheric than essential. when he was born and we started to notice it, my worst fears came to life, and I felt he was at some point I felt like Geppetto, and and that this was Pinocchio. And my prayer every night subconsciously was to make him a real boy, that I want to have that relationship with my son where I tell him stories, where I discuss Einstein and football and Lionel Messi with him or something. I wanted to have that relationship with him, and I felt denied by the shadow of the being that had presented itself as my son. And so I struggled with this at a deep level. One day I was in a shopping mall with my wife, who insists, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll tell you what she talks about. She's more intelligent than I am, just to say. We're in the shopping mall together, and my daughter was with my wife, and I was with Kea. That's my son's name. Beautiful, precious boy. He's 5 years old now, but I think he was 3 then. And we're in India. We're just snaking about, buying some stuff. And at some point, he felt overwhelmed by something, and he crashed to the ground, and he was unable to hold himself. And I remember wanting to put him back together, right? To insist on the fascism of my sanity, to put him in the family way. I think my gestures came across as, put yourself together, man. You're dragging eyes to our direction. You're embarrassing my family. I was holding him that way. Maybe the words didn't come out that way, but that was definitely the energy of my approach to him. I was not being a good father in that moment. My wife noticed. Her name is EJ, and she walked up to me and said, "Walk away and leave me with this situation." I knew I wasn't the right person for that moment. And what she did is what Delini in the 1960s did. She proceeded to lie down with him on the floor, just lay down next to him on the floor in silence. Nothing to do. Just accompanying him in that posture of surrender, right? And this is why she calls a meltdown a spot of worship, a site of worship. An altar raised to a wild passing God, right? Not something to fix, right? And this is why she would hold me and say, listen to yourself. You speak about slowing down in urgent times. This is what it's inviting us to do. This is the autistic politics. This is how to exquisitely touch the otherwise. And she just lay down next to him and was there with him. After a while, they got up, and that was all there was to it. People walked by, and I'm sure they were fascinated with the loss of rectilinearity, which is the emblem of modernity. Everyone ought to be upright. But in a shopping mall, here's a mother and a child just lying down, not doing consumption, not buying anything, not pulling a crowd, just lying down in the middle of a shopping mall. And I think that is the kind of politics that I'm attracted to. Queer new assemblages of posture.
Yeah, I bet you're one of those people who love to just get up and dance in the middle of a restaurant or in the middle of a mall, right? When you're not supposed to be doing that. That's what I love doing. I love dancing and shaking things up when people are kind of expecting you to fit into a box and be a certain way.
I mean, again, I love the way you were talking about that. And I know, because I'm a father and I have a child with special needs also, who's much older now. Okay. And it's hard. It breaks your heart. You wish so much you could have this, but it's not, because they're here to show us something different. They're here to teach us who we are in this lifetime. In a different way. In a different way. Not in this way that we think that here our education systems teach us, but in a way through our heart of who we really are as souls. And if you can recognize that, then you're coming out into who you truly are as an individual. You are becoming reborn again. as a soul. You're rebirthing yourself as again, if you can allow that to happen. And I see that in you, and I hear that in you, and I feel that in you. And I think it's just so beautiful. And your message is just unique, and it's singular, and it's powerful, and it really touches the heart of everybody, of all parents as well. And I want to thank you for that. And it's just amazing.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if only Vincent van Gogh was alive and could have met you. We might have had a different path for him. Well, speaking of, talk to us a little bit about the Emergence Network.
The Emergence Network is an experiment in losing one's way, right? It's my people would say that in order to find your way, you must lose it generously. I feel that the assemblage of responsibility, the galvanizing cautionary tales that tell us about world endings and what we must respond to today are those assemblages are too impoverished for the kinds of actions that we need to take today. This is not a dismissal of protest. This is not a dismissal of the actions that are afoot. I think everything has some specificity and locality, but I think that there's something else that we can do that doesn't look like victory, that doesn't appeal to our models of activism. So at heart, at the very heart of the Emergence Network is the notion of post-activism, which is a very autistic concept, right? I learned from my son the gift of looking away at. That doesn't sound grammatically correct, but I'll explain. My son refuses to, it was one of those very, very strange moments, when I realized that my son will probably, he is giving a lot of eye contact these days, but it's not steady or lasting, right? He could come up to you when he needs something, and he's verbal, so he speaks. But his stance, which seems emblematic for his playful embodiment, is to look slightly away from you as he talks, right? But I don't describe it as a looking away, or, there are only two ways to look at something or to look away from something. I kind of describe it as a looking away at something, right? It's almost like dishuman, like, and I think that's how he notices me well. And there's something emancipatory about that to look askew, to look just off where modernity positions you, is to take into consideration how diasporic and ecstatic and wonderful and beyond this statutory localized thing that you are. So I see this as his way of presenting himself as an invitation to come to the side of oneself, right? To be ecstatic, to move, to be diasporic, right? So that is post-activist in the way that there is a peripherality at work. The thing to do is not to attack the enemy, because we are noticing that once you lean long enough on the adversary, in resisting the adversary, you kind of take the shape of the adversary. And this is at heart, in a sense, what activism is doing today. Activism seems to be an algorithm of continuity. Right? The more we resist, the more we look like the thing we're resisting. And so we are in a politics and a time of stuckness, exhausted stuckness. There's nothing else to do. Even justice kneels on our necks. So where do we go, right? The thing to do is to look away at, is to step to the side, is to develop and cultivate sideways intelligences like crabs do. Not walk in the highway, but wade in the water, become fugitive, like my son is fugitive. So post-activism is what I call this invitation to lose one's way, to cultivate ways of tracing and accompanying the cracks of things.
But what you just described,
yeah,
when you don't necessarily look into one eyes, because I am in full body channel, they will not look at you directly into your eyes. They look elsewhere, because what they see is not this.
They see a network of energy.
They see everything that you are.
Yeah, it's a network of energy.
They look to the side. They look up. They'll look down. They look around, but they don't look at you directly. And you're absolutely right. We don't need to look directly. We need to look at the whole. And that's what we're doing. That's what your son does. That's what we need to do. We need to look not just here. We need to look at the all that we are, the soul, the connectivity of everything.
Well, it also makes me think of, these quantum fields, right? Because we're so into this linear way of thinking. And it's, it's not surprising. That's how we put things, that's how we make sense of things, right? It's big, it's small, right? It's black, it's white. We have all these polarities around us. But in essence, when we realize that we are connected to the all, right? Maybe autistic children are here to teach us that as a sideway glance to reorientate us and train us, or untrain us, I should say, in linear thinking.
Maybe they're saying you are not this, but you are
everything.
All of this.
That's what I was thinking.
Else. This is who you really are.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, fascinating. Wow. I mean, the We Will Dance with Mountains. I just love his naming of everything. So that's a course that you do. It's a post-activist course. And I can almost see from what you've talked about so far where that goes, right? We Will Dance with Mountains. I mean, it feels like it's going with the flow, right? That's what you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. It's not dancing on mountains, it's dancing with mountains. And yes, that is a beautiful convergence of people from around the world to explore how we lose our way together.
The language that you put together that comes through you from all these forces that make up all of us, right? Because we're connected to the all, we're connected to the universe. The universe is in us, right? And so what's happening when you're allowing that to happen through you're literally creating a frequency with these words that are shifting people's consciousness. There's one other thing that I do want to talk about. And this is partially my own personal interest from having lived in Africa and being surprised that in Kenya, they had very different history books than the history books that I had in my 9th grade class when I was in South Africa as an exchange student. You can imagine my surprise to be suddenly acutely aware of the colonial factor as a white person in this all-girls school in Kenya. Shocking, right? And terrifying too, because I was part of the problem without knowing I was part of the problem. And it was right in my face. And so, your book, which I haven't read yet, and I can't wait to read, We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. I mean, another great name. And, you write that the book is committed to righting the wrongs often avoided by Eurocentrists. Without the Lions of Africa speaking and writing about their narratives, the fields of literature, philosophy, social science, history, and maps, as I saw, and psychology, evidence would cede to those without the slightest idea about the African knowledge base or how to add to it. Alas, free the liberated minds. So can you speak to us a bit about that?
There is a proverb that has been echoed by the great novelist Chinua Achebe, who wrote some beautiful monumental work, Things Fall Apart. That until the lions tell their own stories, the tale of the hunt will glorify the hunter, right? So that's the whole book. The book, I mean, this was an early attempt. I probably wouldn't agree with most of the things I write in that book right now, because I'm not moving I'm not moving along a stable cartography of truth. I am meandering and playing. The world is too speculative, too creolized and promiscuous to fit neatly into any one attempt to control it or to name it. To name the eye is to name the color is to blind the eye. But this beautiful burst of creative assembling of minds, because it's a collective of writing from many authors around Africa, is an attempt to say that there isn't one story, there isn't one way to be in the world, right? There are other ways, that there are many psychologies, that there are many bodies, there are many names, there are many pronunciations, there are many things to do, right? It's an attempt to break out of the sensorial monoculture, right? That insists that there is only one thing to do, right? A universalizing trope. This was an invitation to carnival, to a carnivalesque festive twerking party, if you will, a difference of posture, right? That gets us off the high horse of insisting that this is the only way to see and navigate the world. So that's that book. Yes.
It's history rewritten.
When you speak, I feel like I'm reading an incredible novel, a history, a story, a novella.
But yeah, what he's doing is freeing the liberated mind.
I know.
So that's what's happening, but he's doing it not just with language, but the frequency of that language. That's the brilliance that many people may not even realize. And so with that, I would love to end with, you're an essayist and a poet. Do you have a favorite poem that you want to share with us today? And it's okay if you read it, if you've got something that you don't have memorized.
No, I don't. I hope I've come in the spirit of poetry as throughout the conversation. I don't have a particular poem to share. I do have this saying, of course, that I've echoed throughout our conversation, that I want to echo or say again, and that is that the times are urgent, let us slow down. The times are urgent, let us slow down. And I think that's a complete, nothing is complete. Everything is breaking open. It's like Akilandeshvari is seeking, is porous. But slowing down is not taking a break. I just want to speak to that a moment. I've said this. The first time I said this in public was given a keynote in 2014 in South Africa. And I remember the host of the conference returning to Brussels to try to put into practice this idea of slowing down. And then he writes to me and says, it's not working. So I try to write my memo slowly today and to take time and but the imperatives of speed are too urgent, are too lasting, too resilient, too sticky. So what does it really mean to slow down? And my response has gotten better over time, but then I said that it's not a function of speed to slow down. Slowing down is not a thing about speed. It's about noticing the others in the room, right? It is a peripherality, and I'm misspelling that, right? A ferality, like the wilds exist on the side. If only we veer off a little bit, like my brother was saying a while ago, seeing the rhizome and not just the atomized Newtonian entity that we're committed to reproducing in our visual regimes of truth. So that is slowing down. It is about being in the crossroads. I was young when I tried to enact this slowing down without knowing I was enacting it once, because there is a street legend in Lagos that if you bend over and look in the world, look behind you, between your legs, you will see spirits. right? This is street legend. You will see, and spirits are not the Hollywoodized ghosts that we see floating or saying boo. No, those are not the ghosts we see. The spirits in Yoruba cosmology have 3 heads, multiple arms, like hecatoncheires, 100 arms, 100 heads. They're monstrous entities, crossroadian entities, Lovecraftian entities. And I tried to do it one day and my uncle slapped me upside the head. He was behind me and he just slapped. I haven't tried it since. The slap is still ringing, but it was this invitation to not, that maybe risking new shapes is a risk, but maybe sometimes that's the thing to do. And slowing down is risking new shapes. It's shape-shifting into something entirely different. The thing to do is not to reproduce solutionism, is not to reproduce our continuity. It's the invitation to die well. It's to listen. It's to be in touch and to be touched in return by a world that exceeds us. That's what I'll leave us with.
Yeah, that's so well said, actually. Carl Honoré is in this series too. He's actually in the health season. And he's one of the main voices of the slow movement. Right. So he's got various books out, Slow Food, right? Slow Living. But he speaks about it as a lifestyle, a way of being, or a way of showing up in the world. It's a way of being present with what's being present to you, right? And that's the I am becoming what I am becoming.
Yes, I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying. And I often tell people, go and stand on your head and look at the world upside down and see what you
Makes
see.
sense.
Yeah.
So yes.
Makes sense.
Beautiful.
Makes sense.
So any parting words, our friend? Anything that you want to let people know about? Any upcoming books? I mean, obviously, we will Dance with Mountains, the course, right? We'll put a link to that so people can find out about that. But anything else that you'd like to let people know about that you're
I'm hungry. And I'm going for breakfast right about in the next 5 minutes. Thank you, but I've had a lovely time with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been
Yeah.
just an incredible experience.
Yeah. Actually, what we should have done, because we're hungry too,
We have our dinner.
we should have had the whole interview over dinner. We'd be drinking wine and you'd be having breakfast.
Makes sense. Makes sense to me. Thank you so much.